BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, and yes, I'm here. I can see you. Today is a live show. Live. Not on our usual Wednesday shows. It's the KSN show, and it's a pre-taped thing that you can hear across Pennsylvania on several different radio networks, and also here exclusively on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. But due to, I guess you call these acts of God when the weather is so bad that it knocks out power and there's a bunch of different things going on. So Jim was not able to get up any sort of recording situation for us to have the show for this week. So I'm here live talking to you about something I wrote on Monday over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We are going to be discussing Penn State's transfer portal and giving out grades for their work getting players to Happy Valley. We've discussed their needs several times here on the BWI Live Show. We'll go over that as we go throughout the show because it's important to know, what are you grading against in terms of what do you need, and then how did you perform in the portal acquiring that talent, and then kind of the nebulous of what is the highest you could expect? What's a reasonable curve to grade on? So that's going to be kind of what we talk about here on the show today. And also anything you want to talk about, anything you want to join in and have as part of the show. Of course, I have my prepared stuff. And then if you've got any questions, you want to talk about certain players, certain positions, certain people in this, we can break all of that down. Always remind you, a great time to sign up for Blue White Illustrated. I'll rip this Band-Aid off as I give you the special promo, 2 months for $1, code PSU1 for Blue White Illustrated. You can get 2 months. You can get all the inside info, the skinny on recruiting during the lead up to the next National Signing Day in February. And, of course, Junior Days, which are coming up this Friday and Saturday. We're going to be talking about those on tomorrow's live show, on the recruiting show. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Penn State and their work during the winter portal. Here were the needs that we identified talking about here on the show. First thing is, we're talking about it all offseason. We're going to talk about it again today. Wide receiver. Penn State needs wide receivers. A game breaker, a wide receiver number one, a guy that can change the gravity of the field would be great, right? That's kind of the ideal. But a veteran presence is absolutely what they need, with a lot of those class of 2022 guys filling the roster being young veterans and some unproven players that don't have playing experience. You need somebody who's done it before. Offensive tackle, preferably a plug-and-play player, somebody who can come in and play either left or right tackle. Probably the best situation would be right tackle, but you'd like a guy with versatility. We'll get into that a little bit later. The defensive line was something in the portal that they were looking for initially. We'll talk about that. And then cornerback, just at a certain point, just bodies. But really what you'd like to do is replenish the talent and the depth of the position. So both for the future, and they needed a veteran presence on this team. And how did they go about filling all of those needs? There are also some bonus players. We're not going to be talking about Chase Meyer, the kicker. I apologize. The kicking is what it is. It's just something that I think people who understand it couldn't even tell you exactly how to go about doing it in a way that is repeatable for every kicker. So let's get into that wide receiver conversation, and I'll give you the grade to start here, and then we'll talk about it. So Penn State gets Julian Fleming from the transfer portal, the Ohio State wide receiver. We're calling this a B- because the team probably at this position wanted a little bit more depth of experienced players, maybe somebody with some high upside to bring into the room. So 2 would have been preferable. So because of that, you go from, a high B, getting Julian Fleming, a veteran receiver who's done it at the highest level in one of the most complete rooms in America. But you didn't maybe quite get all of what you want. Now, that is the grade I gave in the article. Since then, there's confirmation, as much as we're going to get at this point, that Keandre Lambert-Smith is coming back for another season. So there's a veteran on the team. So presumably, this is your lineup next year of Julian Fleming outside. Keandre Lambert-Smith can go to the slot full-time this year, and then Trey Wallace on the other side. And really, that position, That's where I think there can be a number of options this upcoming season. Whether it's Malik McClain, if he takes a step forward in spring football in his second year at Penn State, maybe Anthony Ivy is a guy that could fill that role. Competition just generally from the depth at that position. There could be some guys at that particular spot who could be helpful, and I'm assuming he'll be the X in this situation. That's where he played this past season. So that is a veteran lineup. That's the veteran lineup you'd be looking for. It's the production that I think is interesting. So let's ask, does Julian Fleming fix this particular situation? Based on the numbers, 2023 was not as good as 2022 for Julian Fleming, kind of like, Penn State. These are some of the numbers you can check over at PFF. But Fleming caught 46% of his catches in man coverage last year. So one of Penn State's problems was in high leverage situations, they were good against cover 0, but cover 1, just man coverage, was a problem. So does Julian Fleming fix that? 7 catches for 56 yards and 0 touchdowns last season, 1 of 4 in contested catch situations with 2 drops. Doesn't look like that really helps the situation. 2022 was better, but he is, of course, the number 3 receiver in both of these situations. 7 of 10, 92 yards, 5 first downs. So that's stability in man coverage situations. That's stability. But he is a zone beating receiver. He's been very good at that over the last couple of seasons. 2022, again, with C.J. Stroud, a better quarterback, 20 receptions, 351 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 50% in contested catch situations in zone coverage situations. So that's kind of his profile. He's not an elite separator, I would say, from a route running perspective. He's a good route runner. He understands how to run routes. He understands leverage and fighting against defensive backs. But when it comes to the actual nitty gritty of making hard cuts or making cuts that create separation, he doesn't always do that. I also think kind of watching. So I went back and I watched Tom Allen's defense against Ohio State. I'm trying to get more information, trying to learn more about what Tom Allen does. And it's really helpful to then go watch Julian Fleming against Tom Allen in Ohio State and see how all of these different pieces interact. And there is a little bit of the Big Ten has figured out Ryan Day's offense a little bit. So it is vertically based. They want to attack downfield with these deep crossers and vertical routes. And Tom Allen just basically designed a bespoke defense that week to take away deep crossers and some of those outside routes that either cut inside, hitches, things like that, doubling with zone. So I think there's an element of that. And then there's an element when you're talking about Julian Fleming's final year at Ohio State where Marvin Harrison Jr. is on his team. And you've got Kyle McCord, who's not to the same level as the quarterbacks recently. So there's a step back in production. Does he have the same problem at Penn State? That's going to be TBD, right? Of Andy Kotelnicki and the Drew Aller and how all of those things interact with him coming to Penn State. But you look at this now, veteran top line, and I think it's a little better than B-. That's what I've been, leading up to here. I think it's better than the initial grade when you factor that in. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith has to be better in the slot. So Julian Fleming doesn't fix this by himself. The man coverage, that's a problem. Keandre Lambert-Smith doesn't fix this by himself. But if you get the best of both of those guys, you get the best of Trey Wallace, now you've got a situation where things look a little better. But here's the reality. Here's the production from last season. Keandre Lambert-Smith in the slot, 22 receptions, 250 yards, 1 touchdown, and a passer rating when targeted, according to PFF, of under 100, 96.4. He was 3 drops and 0 of 1 in contested catch situations from the slot. All of those top-line numbers are bang average for slot receivers in the Big Ten, and that's for guys who have at least 20 targets. So average to below average. So it has to be you have to be committed to this, I think. And then this raises the question to me, if you've got these guys and you want to play with these 3 receivers, do you go so heavy into 12 personnel? Is that your identity next year? I think part of the problem for this offense was, and I said this before, your number 1 receiver moves into the slot when you want to throw to him. You have 2 tight ends that are operating in the shallow part of the field and don't go downfield. And then you have running backs that you want to target. Everything is right here in the middle of the field. You're not targeting anything out or deep. So Somebody's got to do that. And it's hard from the slot sometimes to create those explosive plays the same way as it is of just getting open out wide. They still need that guy, whether it's Amari Evans or Trey Wallace again, bringing him up of explosive deep play guys. Julian Fleming has deep speed. Let's not forget that. Like, he is not slow, but he's not the deep burner that those guys have the profile to be. So that's really the receiver position. You've got some options, but the B grade here is not a home run, right? So an A+ would be you bring in a guy that solves all the problems. And that's going to be kind of the theme for this particular class is none of these guys are really going to solve all of the problems. We got some people here in the chat. Stephen Keel, he says, do you think that it is not about the wide receiver room, but how the new offense coordinator can scheme and adapt to this talent? Yes, it is. But the best schemers still need the pieces to work with. Like, everyone loves MacGyver, but you would much rather have a syringe than have to use a pen and drain the ink out of it, right? Like, just because you can hit a hole-in-one with a broomstick doesn't mean you don't want really nice golf clubs. I've never seen MacGyver or golfed all that much, but you get what I'm saying. Like, you would rather have the proper tools for the proper job, and you still need to have some of those elements. Even Andy Koldenicki is not going to craft an amazingly explosive offense that beats the best teams if he doesn't have the proper tools to do it. So I do think you're right. That is a percentage bonus for these guys, but at the same time, you need the talent to do it. Speaking of the talent to do it, offensive line, Penn State adds Nolan Rucci. And that's going to be where we go next. Penn State loses Olu Fashanu, Caden Wallace, and they bring back a lot of young players. Drew Shelton, he's been groomed for this moment for 2 years now. We've been watching him play. He needs to get better. He needs to step in and take one of these jobs. Chase Basantis, early in the conversation, was a name that was floated around, former target, left Texas A&M, but they ultimately don't get him. He goes back to Texas A&M. Penn State does, though, land a 6'8" offensive tackle that is a former 5-star that has all of those traits and talents and is on the way to being a player that is I don't want to say complete, but more playable guy at 300 pounds than he was at 270 or what he was coming out of high school. So we're going to give this one, the offensive line. They didn't get a second player here. They didn't get an interior player. Not that I think that they necessarily need it, but we're going to go with a B+ here. You land talent and a guy that is not so far away from contributing that there isn't an outside chance with a semester in the weight room and spring football that he could be close to competing for a starting tackle job at Penn State. Competing. We're not penciling him in as a starter, but he's absolutely good enough to be in the mix. And this is where we have to be careful. I have to be careful here because there are 70 total snaps over the last 2 seasons at Wisconsin. And this is the thing that I think is surprising, only 20 special team snaps in the last 2 years. So not only was he not on the field, he wasn't on special teams. And I don't know what that says about Nolan, the situation, the change between Fickle and Paul Christ and Jim Leonard being in there for a little bit. Like, there's a lot of stuff that was going on at Wisconsin. But fresh start at Penn State, he needs to contribute more, I think, at some point. Even if he might see Penn State in a tackle rotation. Right now it is very unsettled. I don't think you should feel confident necessarily about the way that Drew Shelton played in that bowl game and the way that I don't know that we've seen significant progress from him outside of the flashes of great play. So there's an opportunity for Nolan Rucci to play left or right tackle at Penn State. Both of those positions are open. And the guys that might replace him, you've got a redshirt freshman, whether it's Javen Williams or Anthony Donko, and then you've got a guard last year in JB Nelson. Those are your realistic options who we've seen play or that we've seen, even in spring ball, take snaps to those positions. So not a great situation. And Rucci brings talent. I guess that's the thing is like, I'm still enamored with his upside. So maybe I'm giving this a little bit more of a leeway, a little more bonus in that sense, but a B+ of a guy who can come in and I think keeps the level of talent you've acquired without, if he was ready to step in and start and just wanted to get out of Wisconsin, this would be an A+. but he's got to realize that talent. I just think that there's the outside shot. He can get into the weight room, get bigger and stronger. Penn State has proven they can do that with football players. He doesn't look like he's carrying bad weight, of course. Like, he's a 6'8" offensive tackle. He's carrying almost not enough weight, looks skinny. So all of those things I think are really important for Penn State to, this one's got to work out. I think that's the razor's edge here. This could be a B+, but it also could be an F. If they're struggling to find somebody to replace that tackle production, which last year was good, regardless of how you feel about the offense. And there was a lot of protecting the tackles and the quarterback with the drop back passing game. They couldn't do it at all times, and the offensive line was still better, especially at the tackle position, at that pass protection stuff. By the way, if you're watching the show, you're enjoying the show here, we're talking, I know I'm monologuing. It's not always the most entertaining thing is, when we've got, people in the chat. So if you got any questions, comments, conversation, drop that in. Also, share with your friends. Let everybody know we're live today, because this is a bit of an impromptu thing. So if there's people that are regulars that aren't here that usually are, let them know. Like and share the video if you would. Let's get into the defense. The offense, I think, is a little unsettled. That's where you'd see, I don't know about how they did here. But in my mind, the way that they did, they were able to retain talent, and that's where we're going to start on the defense, and acquire talent at other positions is where they really succeeded in this class. Retention, I think, is the buzzword of the offseason. Keandre Lambert-Smith is a part of this conversation, but also the defensive tackles. The top three guys you were wondering whether they're going to come back or not, all of them came back. So Penn State's defensive line, specifically defensive tackle, we're giving this an A. They have the talent to replenish at defensive end. So we're not really looking for guys to come in and step in and be a portal addition at end. Unless there was a Chop Robinson, a borderline 5-star that drops into your lap, and you absolutely take that guy. Like, that can still happen in the spring window. But, we expect them to be okay at defensive end. Maybe even good. Denai Dennis Sutton has to take that step. Guys at that position have to take that step. But defensive tackle, they were going to lose a lot of veteran talent that spent a lot of time developing and finally hit their stride. Devon Ellies is the top of this list to me. The way he played last year, especially in run defense, providing that kind of one technique run stuffer, and not a guy that is eating double teams all the time, but is penetrating into the backfield, fits into this defense really well. That's awesome. I think for Penn State and his development and all those things, that's really good for him to come back for another year. Keziah Izzard, growth, development, he flashes being a complete defensive tackle at times, but, he's got to be on the field. And he's got to be on the field for all the games without some of the off-field stuff, whatever it is, where he's not present for the first 2 to 4 games of the season repeatedly. And, of course, then you have Hakeem Beamon, another guy on that development curve, physically and emotionally. I just think that with his length, if he has another offseason to grow, I don't know that he's ever going to be 315 pounds. But, again, just refining and being older and more mature, this is something that Nate's talked about a lot. And I think with these COVID situations and with NIL, this does make a lot of sense. I think this is a smart thing to do to retain talent and not always bank on the next young guy is going to be better. We'll get into this a little bit later. We're going to be talking about guys with upside on the offense and defense and some of those, if these guys develop, there's going to be some competition this spring. But with these 3 guys returning, Zane Durant taking another step, this is a really good unit. And we don't have to go any farther than this. Penn State's run defense was number 1 in America last year, 75.5 yards per game. That's first in college football. They're returning every major defensive tackle, all but one linebacker, and every major safety that was a part of the run defense last year. Jalen Reed and KJ Winston. Penn State's as strong up the middle as they've been probably under James Franklin. And, of course, they're adding a big defensive line class this year as well. This gives you that runway of, hey, these guys are going to be around a little bit longer. You don't have to worry about, so now we've brought in T.A. Cunningham and some of these freshmen or, Caleb Artis or Jordan Vandenberg. They have to take the step this offseason. You've got a runway to create that pressure cooker of competition between those on the guys lower in the depth chart. And if that produces some of those guys to develop, then you're just, you're humming. at this position. But Penn State's defensive tackles, again, we're giving this an A because retention. This is the best defensive run-stuffing unit in America. I know you're losing Manny Diaz, and like you can't put a number to that, whether they're number 1 next year or they're number 5 or they're number 15 or, something happens, they fall off a cliff. But this is a unit that from a talent and production standpoint returns from the best in America last year. So you should expect very good. They didn't get better in terms of, finding that first-round draft pick in the portal to come in and play for you for 1 year. That would be an A+. Somehow magically they get infinitely better. Just putting that threshold, I don't want to say out of reach, but it would be very hard to get there. Let's go in the chat. I'm trying to read some of these again, as I always do. I don't know what Tom Mason's talking about trying to replicate Michigan. Let's see. Universal Basic Ramen says Penn State arguably has the most talent they've had, yet can't beat Ohio State in their darkest year. That's sad. Okay, I thought we were going somewhere with that other than just, when I say we're playing the hits, by the way. So when I say we're playing the hits, if you read the internet and it's a comment like that, that's established. Like the internet is aware of that opinion and that stance. So yes, we'll flash that up here every once in a while. We'll talk about that as, give you your right to have that opinion. But that's not going anywhere. Like this is a show that's a dead end. So we're not going to be talking about that particular conversation heading down into a spiral of anger and darkness. As you said, in their darkest hour. Stephen Keel asks, when you look at Tom Allen's defense, do you see more of a Tampa 2 shell like with the young cornerback room? This is a great point. It's not a Tampa 2 shell. Most colleges don't play Tampa 2. Most teams can't get away with playing Tampa 2. And by Tampa 2, it means 2 deep safeties all the time and a Mike linebacker that drops 15 yards off the line of scrimmage to cover the middle of the football field to take away some of those in-breaking routes. So that is, it's called Tampa 2 because Monty Kiffin, the dad of Lane Kiffin, created this defense that led the Bucs to a championship. Just for everybody who doesn't necessarily know all of the details there. They run mixed coverages, and that's the point, is Tom Allen's defense runs mixed coverages, mostly 3 and 4, cover 3, cover 4. There's a lot of quarters elements that has caused defenses or offenses trouble. That's taken away explosive plays and allowed them to still play with run defenders in the box. But this is a multiple defense. They don't run a lot of man coverage, though. And I think that's the point, Steven, that you're right about. Shifting away from Manny Diaz ran man coverage a lot. They ran a lot of press man coverage. This is going to run some of those things. There's going to be matching concepts in zone, so there's still going to be single coverage, but it's going to be a lot more about vision, anticipation, and attacking the football in the air more so than playing the man. And the way even some of the underneath defenders, linebackers, and this is going to get into some stuff about Abdul Carter later this offseason, he's very good, or he has been very good at teaching good eye discipline and understanding of concepts of routes to his coverage defenders, not just the corners. There will be busted coverages. Like, the closer I look, the more there are busted coverages maybe that weren't initially apparent, because it can be a little bit chaotic. So it's not perfect. There are some risk rewards in this defense, but we'll also see what he wants to do with more talent, kind of like the Andy Kotelnicki conversation and the receiver talent and all of those things. This is a lot of unknown of you're now arriving at a stage with more tools. And Nate made a good comment about this yesterday on the show of, yeah, I don't know that Tom Allen's job is going to be terribly difficult to turn around the Penn State defense that had, as we just said, is returning the best run unit up the middle in college football. Now, the defensive ends are a whole nother story, but I think we don't need to get down that tangent unless you want to. The question here that Robert Bosfield is asking, with the established depth and experience with a Tom Allen, do you expect them to be as stout? 2 factors come into this. The transition of systems and understanding language within the system so that there aren't mental mistakes from a process standpoint of everyone's on the same page of Tom Allen's defense. How much can they... It's not just the personnel and where you're playing that are the same. what are you calling things so that you know if you're a linebacker, I need to be in the B gap, you know to be in the B gap. If on this play, I need to read what he does to know where to go. However that is played. Do I play this pull inside or outside? Do we spill it? Do we try and sting it in the backfield? Manny Diaz, they did some things that were pretty radical with pulls where they just attacked the defensive end upfield and tried to trap the running back in the backfield. I haven't seen Tom Allen do that. So those little subtle changes and everyone being on the same page, you can arrive in the same spot through different process, but you've all got to be on the same page. And that to me is going to be how this offseason and what they decide to do and how he maybe augments his defense to fit what they have, trying to meet in the middle, or do they go, he goes, this is my system, you need to learn my system, and it, roll it out in September. The second part of this is the simplicity of the front. Because, how do I phrase this? They do less, but that doesn't make it easier. When you do less against teams, you're more predictable, and your players are in spots you expect, so then they have to be better. Like, they have to win. It's not so simple that it's, easy to predict. They do some things. I think Tom Allen has done a great job challenging zone concepts. Again, going back to the game against Ohio State, they did a great job of making that scheme and that offensive line guess about where they were going to be, but it's not as extreme as Manny Diaz. So they got both with Manny Diaz in this front, where it's complicated. You're slanting and you're stunting and you're twisting and you're bringing guys from different locations and you're trying to get these linebackers free for a tackle for a loss. There's just less of that, but Manny Diaz and his defense were both on point with those schemes, and they were aggressive and good and competent and able to hold the point of attack. That was really the shift last year. So do they reach that level of competent execution and talent production? You are removing the variable of complexity a little bit, and that might give some teams the ability to break off more yards. So it's it's a little bit cloudy. I have to see what they do, and we won't see all of it in the spring game, but kind of get an idea of how much they're going to do next year. This is Lambda asked this question: do you think Tom Allen ran more zone because of his preference, or because he didn't have the athletes to run man? Chicken or the egg, Lambda? I know this has been a conversation. You might have even asked this at a different point, but here's the thing: Tom Allen created this defense because maybe he didn't have the man coverage skills he wanted in the secondary, but they found something there. And he talked about changing windows and being unpredictable in the secondary and creating confusion for the quarterback in his press conference. So, when you bring your stated goals and you're saying that to people, that's going to be part of it. I know that you can't take every press conference word for word and it's gospel, but that's a pretty extreme shift to go all man coverage, to be like Manny Diaz in that sense, when you don't have the same pressure packages and pressure results. They've been good at getting pressure, and I think they can be good at getting pressure next year with what he does. But again, it's not as complicated, it's not as aggressive, it's not as it's just different. So if you want to run man coverage, then you got to have these elite corners, and Penn State just lost a lot of experience. So I think it's chicken or the egg on both sides, but I do think if you're asking me right now, with the information I have right now, and I'm not in the defensive room where they're making these plans, I would say they're going to be a zone team next year. They're going to be heavier into zone, and that doesn't mean they're less aggressive. We're going to talk about this. We've shown a little bit on T. Frank's film room. Some of the things they do with defensive backs is bat bleep crazy in terms of rotations and aggressiveness with trying to jump routes. So this is I think the biggest question about next year is how much do they play man? It's a good question, but my starting point here is they're going to be playing zone. And that leads us perfectly, Lambda, you're the best, thank you, into our cornerback grade. Ignore that. It's the cornerback grade. We're giving this an A- because they needed two things within this particular portal window. They needed guys to meet the standard. And talking about that, just now about Penn State's cornerback play. If you look at the talent they've lost, Johnny Dixon and Kalen King, they're going to play in the NFL. Kalen King can be a starter. Johnny Dixon can be a starter. Joey Porter Jr. is a starter. Daquan Hardy's going to be a slot nickel in the NFL. So that's a lot of talent to lose in 2 years. They have to keep that standard. Terry Smith has to find the athletes to play that position at a high level. Now, man coverage is specific, and you might say it's the highest in the order of talent to play man coverage and to be as aggressive as they have been. But you can have great Hall of Fame level zone corners. It's about executing your assignment every single time and having the athletic, just different athletic skills, explosiveness and change of direction to come downhill on zone concepts and jump routes. Mental anticipation. Maybe you don't need to be a 4.35 athlete with uber loose hips, but you do need to be able to change directions and burst and be able to jump routes with anticipation and intelligence. The guys they brought in fit that description. Jalen Kimber is a former top 150 athlete, formerly, and so is AJ Harris. A little bit different. You know, maybe that pure man corner skill is there for Kimber, and AJ Harris maybe is more of what I just described of a zone corner, physical, explosive, come downhill, but maybe doesn't have the greatest deep speed. But, you know, we need to take these one at a time because I got points about each. So let me just start with Kimber because he's going to be the guy that I think clearly Penn State wants to have on the field playing because they bring in veteran experience. They needed to get veteran experience. They got a guy who's played for 2 years, started one in the SEC. Some of the things here, though, about Kimber do cause me some concern. And watching the film, but also just backing it up here with some of the data you can find in man coverage situations, 10 of 16 passes for 230 yards, a touchdown, and a passer rating of 127. So he's allowing over 50% completion, 230 yards, 100 and some yards after the catch. Zone coverage, he was better. And again, this is one of those situations where they play some match concepts and the zone man numbers maybe aren't entirely clear cut in my mind, that I think that maybe it's a fair definition of the two. Also, he played in a system, and we talk about this. You can check this out. I had a thread about this last week, talking about Kimber when I was watching his film about some of the situations where in the Florida defense, his safety totally hung him out to dry by being wrong. So then suddenly he's expecting help from a certain perspective, certain angle. He's expecting there to be a defender there. He's playing his leverage correctly. And then it's just a big explosive play because he did his job, but somebody else didn't do their job. And he looks bad on TV. Then another situation where the safety dove at the legs and kind of fell at the legs of Ladd McConkey in the Georgia game, took him out. And then there's this big catch and run on a man concept. So, some of these numbers can be skewed by the situation. They don't paint the full picture, which is why you got to have both. But the man coverage, I think, is fair because watch the game against LSU. In man coverage, he was not good enough, not physical enough to attack those receivers and play to that level. So the aggression needs to change for him to be a good corner overall, just kind of from a skill perspective, and allow his traits, his speed, his athleticism, his mobility, all to come through. Because if you're not playing with confidence and being assertive on the field, those skills don't necessarily matter. On the flip side, AJ Harris, I saw 89 total snaps. 89 total snaps is not a lot. This boils down to 5 targets in man coverage and 3 targets in zone coverage. Again, there's some stuff on film. We're trying to get a baseline of his understanding of what he is and how he plays. Maybe not the fastest guy in the world, but I think fits this defense that they're trying to build under Tom Allen very well. Zone corner, he's aggressive coming downhill. He might not have the loosest hips in the world to turn and run with everybody, but that might also be technique. He was a freshman last year. A lot of that stuff, talking the flip side of Jalen Kimber. He might have the athleticism, but doesn't have the institutional experience in order to play press man coverage that way. There is a little bit of you can or you can't there, but you can get better knowing exactly how to do it and not overcommitting to double moves or things like that or getting set up at the line of scrimmage. But in certain situations, he looked very good. He understood the Georgia defense, which again uses a lot of complex coverages and asks a lot of these guys. late in game, mop up stuff. They're playing simpler, but they are doing still stuff out of the game plan. So he looked impressive. I don't think you're expecting him to come in and start this among these four corners that they've got, but he has the talent to be a comparable player to Johnny Dixon when they got him out of South Carolina. Different skills, but comparable talent level. Eventually can be a plus starter in college football at the Big Ten level. So they got the assignment. The only thing they didn't get, again, is they didn't get a guy to come into the portal and be a superstar. And that's kind of where we have to have this conversation about the portal and NIL and the reality of getting some of these top targets. Talking to the people we do here on the show and having Nate and Fitz talk about these things and having money be a part of the conversation. You can have a guy, you can want to get a guy, you can have a perfect situation for him, but if you don't have the NIL resources, or as Nate talked about yesterday, you don't want to commit those NIL resources to somebody that is an unknown and an outsider to create problems in your locker room, that's not the model they're going for. They still want to develop this talent that's, on the roster and take care of their own. So there is an interesting, how do you grade these guys? Because they didn't get some of the top talent at the positions where they needed. That would be a plug-and-play starter. That would make the team, your eyes get wide. But was that on the table? Was that realistic? Was that fair? And that's what we get to, and this will be the final thing from me. We'll talk to you in the chat here fully after this, is the overall grade here. And I think maybe I was even a little bit harsh here. The overall class grade, maybe I hedged my bets a little bit. We went with a B+. Now, literally, I averaged the grades that I gave them in a grade calculator like a teacher. So if we gave them a solid B for the receivers, now we're talking about this might be an A- grade. They got a receiver in the portal to come in and be a veteran presence. I don't want to say he's Mitchell Tinsley with Julian Fleming, but a zone receiver that's going to be where you expect him to be and is going to get open in most of the situations you expect from a veteran receiver. Again, with Keandre Lambert-Smith coming back, you've got that explosive, dynamic quality. Maybe you can play him where you actually want to play him this year instead of having to have this hybrid situation. You get Nolan Rucci, a top talent perspective at a position that if you're trying to get a plug-and-play top talent, again, that's kind of the laugh at that idea. That's kind of laughable. So they kind of split the difference there. Can develop the talent. They have a prior relationship. They clearly believe in him. They recruited him twice. They believe they can get the best out of Nolan Rucci. But is it right now? Not really. It could be. I think there's a quick development. Penn State stays the same at a position where they were elite. And then, of course, they bring in guys that I think fit the bill and fit the definition with Jalen Kimber and A.J. Harris. And again, I'm a little concerned about Kimber in that, better pass rush might be a part of the conversation. I know that Florida didn't have the same pass rush that Penn State had the last 2 years, but very few teams have. And does Penn State have that again this year? We're going to find out. That's some of the things we're going to find out. So overall, I would say this is a B+ effort, A- effort for Penn State. They got all of their needs in the transfer portal and realistic players that you can expect something out of for this next year, whether and also for the future. So that's what I got here for the BWI Live Show today. A little bit of an impromptu thing. If you want to check out all the stuff over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, I wrote the article earlier this week. Some of the other things I'm thinking about this week, just, upside. We were talking about all these players and who fits into the depth chart, who are the guys we're looking at, but maybe who are the potential guys to make good on some unreal talent. And we'll see. Don't have any insight into that. Just, from a physical perspective, from a traits perspective, who has the most upside on the roster. That's something that we're going to talk about later this week. So check that out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We talked about this yesterday. Robert Parker, from what I read, the new special teams coordinator, seems like a home run hire. We talked about that on the show yesterday. You want to check that out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as well. We have the highlights of the show cut up and put into our video player. You can check them out there. This is from JC Corrigan. Where are you most pleasantly surprised and most puzzled with the transfer portal results? I just think that they got guys that have a lot of talent. I think that A.J. Harris has a good bit of talent. I think Nolan Rucci has a good bit of talent. They got the veterans they needed, and I think those high floor, maybe you'd call those guys, are known quantities in Julian Fleming and Jalen Kimber. They're not as sexy. They're essential. They're super important. But, this is the thing, I got into football because I love these guys that have so much talent that can do things you've never seen before. Nolan Rucci could be one of those guys. So having the opportunity to see that, if it all works out, I think that's where you'd say you're pleasantly surprised that they got some guys that have talent. And that's where I think you split the difference in some of these areas of immediate impact, but also long-term potential. And Rucci is just longer along the line in physical development, college development. He's an older, more mature player than some of the guys they have on the roster that have similar talent. I made this comparison. Garrett Sexton has similar talent, but you don't want him having to do it this year. So Nolan Rucci brings a little bit of both. And I think it's a big win. And it is another one of those Phil Troutwine development stories that I think I have a hard time sometimes with development because so much of it is on the player to get it. Like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Olu Fashanu put in the work and had the talent and put in the work to be great. So both elements need to be there. Nolan Rucci seems like a guy, from what I've seen, in a situation that's been in flux since he got to Wisconsin, that has put in the work to be as good as he is now, but where he is on the development curve, he needs more of that development, and Phil Troutwine has developed guys. So I guess it's another interesting one where that'd be maybe a feather, like undeniable proof that you can develop a guy who was not on that path before and then gets to Penn State. And if he does, then you have, I think, Your Honor, clear, irrevocable proof that he can develop offensive linemen. So it's an interesting situation where there's a lot of potential with that one. KJ Johnson says, I think B+ is a fair grade. Hits the needs now and needs you have to hit. Eli says, we still need another deep threat and another solid cornerback. T. Frank, what else do you think Penn State needs to get? I'd give it a B to a B-. I think 2 corners is a win. If you wanted to say they need to bring in a proven slot corner, I could get on board and understand that. But at the same time, if Jalen Kimber, Zion Tracy, and Cam Miller are all on the roster, one of those guys can play the slot. I think Zion Tracy might be able to play the slot from a talent perspective. Cam Miller, I think, has the same, all 3 of those guys might have the same ability to play from the slot. From a talent perspective, how many of them can understand and perform that task? You don't have a proven guy there. But don't forget Antoine Belgrave Shorter and John Mitchell, 2 highly thought of and in some situations highly ranked corners, are coming into the room as well. So they are getting talent from that perspective, and Penn State has been more bullish to play young corners early if they have to or want to. So there is more talent coming in. We talked about King Mack maybe playing slot corner for playing that nickel role for Penn State. There are options on the roster, including some of the safeties as well. So there's a little bit of wiggle room with that slot position. And so that's why I don't necessarily agree with that. From the receiver perspective, they got a lot of deep threats. But again, are you finding a proven deep threat in the transfer portal if you're not paying for it? That's, again, I guess where I'm going with this, Eli, is I agree with you. They need a guy that can be the guy. Finding that in the transfer portal, I think, is an unrealistic ask. And maybe you're saying just a deep threat, but even just a deep threat is unbelievably valuable. It is super valuable. And those guys, Isaiah Bond is going to Texas. He left Alabama to go to Texas. So these are the ions. I don't know anything about science, but just like ion attaching to a different molecule or something like that. Just they're in a certain class going across up here, and maybe you're not in that particular conversation because of what we described with Penn State and not willing to pay for talent in the portal the same way. And I think that Fitz made this point last week, and I think he wrote about this over at the site. Guys that Penn State targeted last year in the portal and just reviewed how they did at their individual institutions where they went that wasn't Penn State, it's still a crapshoot. I don't want to say there's a reason these guys are leaving, because there's a lot of different reasons these guys are leaving, but they are leaving, right? So they're not complete products going to the NFL, which is where you're getting those guys, unless they have, they've proven it already and they just need to run up their clock. And in that case, it might be the guys we're talking about going from one place that's going for a college football playoff to another that plays on that level of NIL. So, like, not to repeat myself, but that's kind of where it ends up, of what's available, what's realistic, and how do you find those guys. So I do think you're right, Eli. Like, the receiver room, they can add another. I think that would be wise. That's going to be a place where they could. Offensive line is another place they could add another player. But in the spring portal, that's going to be something different. And those guys, again, are going to have to make up a lot of time that they're not going to have in the winter portal, which is why I think this group is so important. And that's really the last point. And I think that, I make that in the article, and I'm going to make it here at the end. It doesn't guarantee that all of these guys are going to work out and they're going to work out this year, but it gives them the option, gives them the opportunity. We saw what happened with guys arriving late last year. Being in the conditioning program, I think, is the biggest thing. Having the winter and the summer to build up in Penn State's program, which has been, again, proven that it makes dudes. And then to be in spring ball and get those practices, that time with your teammates, but also integration into a new offense and a new defense. Everyone's starting from an even playing field right now from that perspective of how there will be some retention maybe, and there will be some advantages for guys that have been here before and all that stuff. But from new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, the position coaches are the same, but you do have to all learn certain things together. And doing it now, as opposed to the spring, gives you the option, if you put in the work and the time and things work out and you don't get hurt and all that stuff, to be a realistic option for next year. That's why this is such an important window. So that really, to me, is why this is a good job for Penn State, to give guys time to develop and the option to be part of the year next year, and because they got guys that can do it. I think the talent here is pretty good. So that's today's BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. There is a big recruiting weekend coming up next for the class of 2025. Junior Days on the way. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow. Fitz, myself, maybe Ryan. There's some weather stuff brewing, so we'll see if all of that hits this week. But we'll keep you up to date on all that stuff. We're talking about recruiting no matter what tomorrow, 10 a.m. here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We'll talk to you then.